Well, I want to thank Father Nate for receiving me so warmly here and all of you at my home parish. Again, I don't feel nervous after hearing the gospel that you guys will take offense. But you do know my parents, they're in the front row and hopefully, well, almost front row. They'll stay awake while I'm preaching. It's interesting that Jesus is coming home and it should be a big celebration. And he's with all his disciples. He's been doing wonders, but the people take offense. Kind of like, who's this guy think he is? We know him. He was just a carpenter. Now he thinks he's the Messiah. And they take offense at him. And Jesus simply says, a prophet is not without honor except in his native place. And he couldn't perform any works of healing there on any grand scale. So much did their lack of faith disturb him and distress him. We sometimes forget that Jesus carried a lot of burdens in his ministry. He knew human weakness at the core of his being. He gets rejected in his hometown. All the religious leaders criticize him. They call him a drunkard and a glutton, a son of Beelzebul, the devil, and a friend of sinners. So among the religious authorities, no kind words. His disciples, as we know, were not the sharpest blades in the drawer. Most of the time, they misunderstood what he was teaching them. And I'm sure he knew his share of loneliness and frustration in facing the challenges he did often, although he never lost his joy. Then he faces his passion. In the Garden of Gethsemane, it says in one of the Gospels, his sweat became like drops of blood. And 3 times he begs the Father to take this cup away from him, but he always ends by saying, not my will, but thy will be done. He's betrayed by one disciple, denied 3 times by another. He's jailed. He's mocked. He's flogged. He's crucified and dies naked on a cross between 2 thieves. I marvel at how Christ agreed to come to earth to be one of us and to agree to be so weak and so vulnerable in the face of human sin. He did it for one reason: love. Love. We know the cross is the central symbol of Christianity in the Western world. It is a Roman torture instrument. It's the most unacceptable thing that can happen to a human being. But Christ accepts it. He accepts the unacceptable. And now it's the core symbol and holiest symbol of our faith, because it's the tree of life as well. So now it's our turn. Are you ready for the good news? You got to go through some stuff too. But does it ever occur to us that what matters most in our life isn't our successes, our accomplishments, our talents? Not that there's anything wrong with any of those, but probably the most important dimension of our lives would be our weaknesses. Are you deficient enough that you can't ward off significant suffering from your life? Have you had to live with a certain amount of failure in your life? Is there any history of confusion or self-doubt or inner anguish? Hebrews states that Christ can deal gently with the ignorant and the wayward, since he himself is beset with weakness. Life is here to challenge us. We want to be in our comfort zone, right? And sometimes we get in them, like when the Cubs won the World Series. But that doesn't last very long. We cannot stay in our comfort zone if we wish to grow spiritually. Our suffering is what becomes the portal, the entryway into the Paschal mystery. So my small, limited ego self must die so that my true self can be born in Christ, and it doesn't happen without the cross. But if I embrace the crosses of my life the way Jesus embraced his heavy cross, then at last my heart one day can merge with his sacred heart, the universal heart of Christ. In my own life, I would say my biggest cross has not been having 5 sisters. I'm the only boy. No. I love them very much. My biggest cross has been anxiety. And I remember as a little guy at the LaPorte 4th of July parade. Some of you are older. Remember that Saracen that had the swords? And he had uncovered chest with the belly sticking out. And he had this hat. And every time I saw the guy, I'd run, get away. But all he'd ever do if he came up to you was blow his whistle at you. What was I so afraid of? And I think it kind of reminds me that the only way to really deal with our fears and to come through them is to face them, even if our knees are shaking. Because ultimately, all they can do is what a whistle could do, because we have Christ. When I started theology, I remember anxiety hit me very hard, and I was overwhelmed and uncertain of what was happening. And I talked to a very holy priest. As I shared my tale of woe with him, he kept smiling. How could he be smiling when I'm pouring out my distress? And he said, Patrick, this is a good thing the Lord has knocked you off your high horse. Because if you didn't go through this, you would be an arrogant son of a... Well, I'm not going to swear in church. But you get the point. What a surprise to me to realize this was necessary. What really has helped me along my spiritual journey would be today's second reading from 2 Corinthians. And keep it with you whenever you're being tested. That Paul has his extraordinary revelations and God humbles him by giving him an angel of Satan to beat him. Wow. He begs the Lord, please take this away. And what does Christ say? Not what he wants to hear at first. My grace is sufficient for you. For power is made perfect in weakness. That doesn't sound very American. Paul goes on to say, I will rather boast more gladly of my weaknesses in order that the power of Christ may dwell with me. Therefore, I'm content with weaknesses, insults, hardships, persecutions, and constraints for the sake of Christ. For when I am weak, then I am strong. Do we believe this? Do we really believe this? I chose as my Episcopal motto, Ave Crux Spes Unica. Does anyone know what that means? You can raise your hand. Father Nate, you can't? Uh-oh, you know. What is it? Oh my goodness, I was going to offer $5 to anyone who guessed it, and you got it. I'll see you afterwards. I'm impressed. Hail the cross, our only hope. It's also the motto of my order, the Congregation of Holy Cross, to which I belong. And I always take to heart what our Holy Cross constitutions say. If we, like him, encounter and accept suffering in our discipleship, we will move without awkwardness among those who suffer. So here in this Eucharist, Christ gives himself fully to us. He humbles himself again and becomes something simple, bread and wine. And his body is broken on the altar once again, mystically, so that he can become our spiritual food. The Lord of heaven and earth enters us at communion and touches us where we are still broken, where we are weak, where we are wounded, where we are still afraid, where we feel lost. He becomes one with us in our weakness, and he fills our hearts with joy that Paul himself knew. So I'll leave you with one of my favorite quotes from Catherine Doherty, who is known as the Russian Baroness. She came through Canada after the Russian Revolution forced her family out of the country and worked with the poor. But she was a great mystic, and she wrote this: the sufferings, tensions, difficulties, and problems, which must perforce fill every life, have a remedy: joy. Christ's joy whispers to us, shouts to us that life is worth living, even with all of its sufferings and difficulties, that it has a purpose, and that it leads to perfect happiness when born with him, through him, and for him. It leads to union with him.